I'm really glad that you could come and we could spend a few minutes talking about the new math series, Go Math and Big Ideas. Thank you for being part of Summer Committee and joining in this conversation. What were the challenges that you felt when you first opened the book or first realized you had a new math curriculum?
I know for me that when we were at Nashville and we were sitting in that meeting where they were talking about it and they were saying, oh, you have this and this and this, I just thought, oh, this is great, but there's so much, and how am I going to be able to use it all? And, then I go back to school and I start doing it, and I felt like my students were a little confused and overwhelmed because it was so different than before, and suddenly all these different pieces that we had not had before. So that was my challenge. A lot to do, a lot to have.
I was excited to get started with the electronic portion of it, the computer portion, because that is an area that I'm interested in, but I was kind of unhappy because when we got back from Nashville, there wasn't time to get to know it all and to learn how to use it all, so that was my challenge.
I started out, 2 big boxes. I teach first and second grade, and these 2 big boxes got dropped off in my room, and I was excited. I like to try new things, but as I was going through it, I didn't have enough time to do preparation ahead of time. In the past, I could just open the book and run with it, and I realized this is very different. And I got rather tangled up. It felt almost as though it was scripted, and I felt like since I knew very little about the program, I needed to really kind of follow the script, and it tangled me up pretty fiercely.
I think my biggest problem was I would compare myself to Linus from the Peanuts comic. Somebody took my blanket, and that was the old math series, and they gave me a new blanket, the Go Math, and I wasn't convinced I needed it, and that was the biggest issue, I think, for me.
One problem I quickly honed in on was the fact that in 4th grade, there was a heavy focus on multiplication. And unfortunately, quite a few of my students came in not being very solid with their multiplication facts.
My biggest challenge was I started the year with brand new series, and I had 7 grades and 8 students. And so diving into something that I was not familiar with so many grades was a big challenge for me.
Didn't have 7 grades, but I had 4. And it was my first year in a multi-grade classroom, so that was a huge challenge. I was trying to figure out how to, within 60 minutes, make sure I gave the time to my first graders who are more like kindergartners at the beginning of the year, and these 4th graders who don't have those multiplication skills, and it's diving them right in. And so it was a lot of time to plan that I didn't have, and I just felt like I wasn't meeting their needs.
Wow. So did you find solutions?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I know that when I got the program, I was saying I was overwhelmed, but the more I spent time with it, the more I realized that, okay, I have all this stuff, but I don't have to use it. I don't have to do exactly this or exactly that. I just need to find what I can use as a resource to help the students that need it. And if I want to switch up my lessons, if I want to do buddy teaching or something like that, I can do that. I don't have to just do this and then pull out this assignment if they need this. I have those as tools available, and that just released a lot of pressure off of me and a lot of time as well.
Oh, okay.
I think for me, that not having time with the computer, I kind of solved by letting my kids go to the computer themselves, and they were able to figure out a lot of the stuff that I didn't have time to sit and really work through. So it probably wasn't the prescribed use for the computer tools. But for this year, for me just getting familiar with it, it was good to let them investigate it for themselves.
Now, I use the computer as well. I use it as a station. That was the way that I tackled this. I had to divide my kids up, and I clustered 3rd and 4th and 1st and 2nd. So even if I wasn't going exactly by each chapter of the books layout in the in their books, I still spent time with third and fourth working on multiplication. Even if I had to skip a chapter, and first and second working on addition, and that's how we worked through it. And the group that wasn't working with me, I created stations, games. I used the online resources, the little Curious George and everything. And then if they were not if they hadn't finished their work in their books, then I also gave them opportunity to do that. And so rotating them in kind of helped me to get to everyone and make sure I was meeting everyone's need.
I also use the computer end of things, but what I found was to take my computer and connect it to a projector and then put the lessons on the whiteboard so the students could work it out that way. And they really liked going to the board and working through things, and it made it more interactive in that way. But I think one of the biggest things I had to do in the beginning is spend a lot of Sunday time working on and additional time outside working until I got comfortable with the lessons. And as teachers, we don't always want to do that because we want to spend time with families or watching football or other things like that. But sometimes you have to prioritize things, and in the beginning, take the time to learn it so that in the end you have more time to do other things.
I wasn't able to really access the computer portion of it. It was one problem after another. I spent a lot of time on the phone trying to work it out. So I kind of threw that a bit to the wind and worked my way through using basically the textbook. And I discovered that the manipulatives and the activities they had me do with the manipulatives, the kids really enjoyed it. And it also helped me to understand, because they were asking me to teach things that I've taught quite a few times, but in a totally different way. And at first it wasn't making sense to me. But as I pushed through, the kids started to understand. I was like, oh, good, there's something, it's working. And what I really enjoyed, my class really enjoyed, was talking about it. They, we would practice the words, the vocabulary, and the kids love the conversations. Oh, I learned how to do it. I figured out you can do it this way. And then they would explain it to their classmates, and they would use the vocabulary. And math became much more of a give and take, a talking and discussing it together, which I like to talk. They did too. We had a good time with it. And they were really able to express to me that they were understanding what we were talking about. That's when I got less fearful about doing it differently than what I was used to, because I could see, they're getting it. Oh, good.
Like Karen, I didn't have access to any of the computer stuff. Like, I had my own computer, but I didn't have student computers in my classroom. So what you did, Nakia, I just created centers and things like that. When a lot of the other teachers were able to access the computer stuff, I just made sure we had something else available so that they could still be practicing and getting, more skill drill or whatever in that they needed, but it wasn't dependent on technology.
I found that getting to know the resources really helped me, because in a multi-grade classroom I had so many students and a lot of needs, and so I feel getting to know the tools for the computer really helped. If I had to work with one group, another group could be previewing it online or even just looking at their book. But for me, it was a lot of trial and error initially, because I had to situate my classroom in a different way that I've never done before. And I found that getting to know the online resources, I was able to find a lot of materials to help bridge the gap from jumping from the old series to the new series. Once the students were acquainted with the routine and I was acquainted with the routine, things seemed to flow a lot better.
And I found what Karen said was also true in my classroom, that at first, my students referred to it as go away math instead of go home. And, but once they got more involved in it, and there were more discussions, and hey, we could do this and that, and I think that really helped. Once the students had enthusiasm for the program, then I was like, hey, maybe this isn't so bad. And so that helped as well. And in some ways, the students' enthusiasm dragged me more into the program. And that was a good thing to see.
And I found websites with multiplication games that my kids could play. And then we'd have a weekly challenge. I would give them 100 multiplication math facts, 5-minute drill. And it was, let's see who can finish before the teacher. And of course, I finally got under 2 minutes, 100 facts in under 2 minutes. They were never able to beat my time, but they sure enjoyed trying. And they learned their facts too.
And like you said, I had to figure out how to maneuver these, the talk and the writing, because one of the things, especially with third and fourth, they weren't used to talking about math. They weren't used to writing about math. And so one of the things I decided to do was like you'd have a page of problem solving where they had to write out their answers. And so I would slide the book aside. We would talk through it, talk through their steps, use manipulatives to replicate and models to replicate the problem and how it was laid out. And then through that discussion, they were able to then go back and do the writing. It was like oral rehearsal. So it really helped them to figure out how to write about math, because I had to really take more time to guide them through talking about math. And I also had to realize that for some grades, they're just not going to get through a lesson a day. It's not going to happen because there's so much of a foundation that hasn't been laid to really get them ready to do this type of math at this rigorous pace.
And I think what you mentioned, that change from the answer is important to the process you go through to find the answer, was a big thing for the students to develop.
And for the teachers.
Right.
Yeah.
And parents too. I don't know about
yes.
you all, but parents have a difficult time with that too.
Well, I think that you were saying that you'd have them talk about it, and that was something that really worked well with my students. We'd get to a question and it'd say, what if this changed? And they'd all sit there.
Yeah.
You know, but then I'd say, turn and talk to your neighbor, and they have somebody that they sit next to, and they talk, and then I'd say, okay, now what if this changed? Every hand would go up, because maybe they didn't have the exact right answer, but they had thought it through and had something to share, and it just got them engaged in it. And then once they were engaged, wow, then we were able to understand the concepts and really get into them. But it's just getting them to think about it in, language goes along with math, and not keep them isolated.
Yes.
Did you find that parents also had issues with this? How did you bring them along?
I know I had several calls in the evening saying, Ms. Hampton, it's first grade. Why am I struggling to help my child with their homework? I thought this would be 8th grade when I would have this challenge. So I definitely had parents who would call because they couldn't, they didn't understand the strategies that we were teaching them. And so that was part of the challenge. But just like the children were, encouraged to push through, and I had to push through. I had to bring them along and get them to just push through. And we talked through it, over the phone. And I had to make myself available to really help them, because I knew that they wanted to be there for their children. They wanted to help them with learning math, but they just didn't have the tools. And so that was a big part of it.
That was another place where I found Think Central pretty helpful, because they can access the whole book there, as well as the games and things. So even not all of my families have computer access, but for the ones who did that had questions, it was really easy for me to say, okay, you can go online and your child can show you. And the kids sometimes would step mom and dad through the lesson, through Think Central, and go, see, we did this in class, we did this in class. And then by the time they were done with that, the kid didn't have a question anymore. And mom was like, okay, I just watched the math lesson. Okay. So that helps solve it too.
One of the things that I hear each of you telling as a solution, part of that solution was that you took control of your curriculum. You didn't allow the curriculum to control you, and you chose what was going to be presented, and then you found the best way to do that. And I think that's the exciting part of the resource that we've been able to create for North American teachers, the North American Division teachers. We are excited to present it, and I hope they find it useful.